So we'll go ahead and get started. Again, this is our Beat the Peak webinar, all about how to save the most on time of use. I see a lot of folks here, familiar names, so thank you again for joining. If you've joined in the past, if you're a customer, super, we're glad to have you. Glad to talk about what this could look like for you and your system. If you're new to Cape Fear Solar, then we'll talk in a moment about what that looks like as well and how we can help you discuss how solar and storage could be a part of solving for your time of use needs. So before we go too much further, in a moment, I'll give an introduction to who we are at Cape Fear Solar, super brief. A lot of you, again, know who we are. We'll speak to the challenge of rising energy costs and specifically shifts towards time of use pricing. We'll talk a little bit about planning around time of use and how to maybe make the most of it even without solar and storage. And then we'll talk about how solar fits in the picture, the power of solar and reducing your grid reliance, and the impact of being on a time of use rate on how we might design a system. Then we'll speak to adding storage into the picture and just at what level that provides increased independence and optimization. Lastly, I'll pass it to my colleague Caleb here to speak to a case study for one of our customers in South Carolina, who has seen success with solar and storage and exactly what the impact was to their bill. And then finally, we'll have some Q&A. Again, I've got my colleague John Padden here as well. So any questions from folks about what it could look like for them, specific time of use questions or specific utility rate questions, we'll be happy to answer those at the end of our time. So feel free to submit those in the chat as we go along. Let's jump in. So first and foremost, again, we're Cape Fear Solar Systems. My name is Gabe Amy. I'm our Chief Marketing Officer here at Cape Fear. We've been in business now since 2007 and have done over 4,500 installations in and around southeastern North Carolina. We've got 70 employees all operating here out of our Wilmington headquarters, and we've been consistently reviewed as the #1 solar installer in southeastern North Carolina. One thing I'll just point out here, is Project Grace. It's a pretty exciting project that actually just got completed in downtown Wilmington. Is the new library that is open for visitors. And I think the museum part of the project is still undergoing construction, but there's a very significant solar canopy over there for anyone who's in the area, downtown Wilmington, wants to check that out. Super cool project. It's going to be a unique part of downtown Wilmington. So wanted to share that as well. So jumping right into it, the challenge that we're speaking to today is just time of use pricing. First off, what is it? What is the impact to us as homeowners? And also, what's to be said about utility rate increases? What part does that play in this conversation? And, first and foremost, utility rates are rising and new rate structures are being implemented to try and combat that. And so we've got a graph here over on the right, which is actually depicting just how significant these increases have been. One of the things that we hear from a lot of our customers is, my bill stays pretty much the same, or on the contrary, plenty of people have said my bill now compared to what it was 5 or 10 years ago is much, much more. But it's difficult to try to understand, okay, what impact is that going to have over time? What impact has that had over time? And so this chart here, as you can see, the date on the left, that pin there where it says 0.103 per kilowatt hour, that's saying 10.3 cents per kilowatt hour was the average cost of electricity that's January of 2017. And so since then, what we've seen here is this is all electricity rates with all utilities for residential customers in North Carolina. So there's a mix, and some of them change seasonally, some of them are time of use based. And so you see a sort of ebb and flow. But where we've gotten to here in 2024 and now in 2025 is, fairly consistently seeing rates peak up above 15 cents per kilowatt hour. If you'd talked to a lot of us just a couple years ago, even when it was 12 cents per kilowatt hour, if you told me or told some of us that it was going to be 15 cents in that short of a period of time, that would have been extremely surprising to us. And I think it's important to understand that even for those of you who are looking at your bill and you say, well, it says I'm paying 12 point something cents here. is, if you're on Duke Energy, you've got additional cost per kilowatt hour baked into the summary of rider adjustments. And one of the things that we have to understand is that for every kilowatt hour that we use, and for every, penny that we're paying on our kilowatt hours, we're also paying a sales tax for. And so there's an increased cost there of using and paying more for electricity, is that it continues to go up over time as well. And so, just looking at sort of this short picture here from 2017 to now here in 2025, we're looking at an 8-year period where we've seen essentially a 50% increase in our utility costs. Now that's pretty extreme. We like to model conservatively about 3.5% rate increase year over year. But I thought that was pretty telling of the direction that our costs have been going over the last decade. Now, jumping into time of use. Well, actually, before that, I want to speak briefly to how we're currently billed for energy use. If you're not on a time of use structure, then a more common way of using energy and being billed for it is just that you're going to pay some form of a base facility charge. For Duke Energy, that might be $16. For Brunswick Electric in the past, it's been 25 or $30. And so then you would be paying just a flat fixed cost per kilowatt hour for all the energy that you use beyond that. Most structures are that simple. Some are a little bit more complicated in that the first however many kilowatt hours you use might be at one rate, and then when you go over that, maybe it's at another. But the basic function is that it doesn't matter what time of day you're using or consuming the electricity, you're going to pay the same for it no matter what. Now, the shift towards time of use rates is motivated by the utilities to make sure that they're incentivizing homeowners to try to change some of their habits so that there isn't as much of a burden on the utility and the grid as a whole during those peak windows when everyone's consuming more electricity. And so the pricing structure is used by utility companies that adjust the rate you pay for electricity throughout the course of the day. Utilities are adopting TOU rates, again, to reduce grid strain, operate more efficiently, and maintain reliability. And so on this next slide, we'll talk about how these time of use rate structures are built, some different types of time of use structures, and make sure that we're educated about what that looks like. The challenge, so the different types of time of use, they're adopting time of use to be able to reduce grid strain and operate more efficiently. But the different types of time of use structures are a more traditional time of use where you have a peak and sometimes even a shoulder period, and then you have an off-peak period. And usage during these periods is billed at a higher rate when it's on peak and shoulder periods than when it's the off-peak period. And the peak period is typically just maybe a 3-hour window. A lot of times in the summer months, it's 6 to 9 p.m., for example. And then the winter months, it might be 6 to 9 a.m. So it might change from one season to the next. The shoulder periods are going to be sometimes around those peak periods on certain days where you might have sort of a semi-peak, as they might see it, where, okay, there's higher usage in this period, but it's not quite a peak period, and it's certainly not off-peak. And so they bill a little bit more for that than they would if it were just off-peak. Time of use demand, or TOUD, are bills energy used at a lower kilowatt hour rate, but charges for the max kW demand during a peak window. So to speak to that very briefly here, what they're more concerned with from a billing perspective on a TOUD plan is looking at just how much power were you pulling at one given moment, basically a 15-minute interval, over it's any 15-minute interval during the peak window for a billing period. So what that means is that if you have one day during a month where you have a 15-minute interval where you are pulling 2 times what you were on any other day during that same billing period, doesn't matter. That's what you're going to be paying for per kW. And in average, kW demand for a home during the peak period could very easily be anywhere from 6 kW to 10 or 12 kW, depending on the size of the home. And that's just going to be because, they're again looking at the evenings from 6 to 9 p.m. during the summer when everyone's HVAC is turning on, when they get home from work, and they're starting to cook dinner. Or they're looking at first thing in the morning in the winter when your house is trying to heat up after a long, long, cold night. So those are the peak windows that they're looking at. And again, they're concerned with that demand charge and that can really be variable from one period to the next. So again, just to run through peak hours when electricity demand is the highest, and so the prices are typically higher, usually late afternoon and early evening when major appliances are being used as people are returning home from work. Off-peak hours are when electricity demand is the lowest, so the prices are typically lower, often late at night or early in the morning when most people are still sleeping. It could also be sometimes the middle of the day. If there's no shoulder period, then the middle of the day would also be off-peak. Shoulder periods are sort of intermediate periods between peak and off-peak hours. Prices are typically lower than peak rates, but definitely higher than off-peak rates. And those would only apply for some time of use structures. And so to get a little bit more specific here, obviously we're located in Wilmington. We work with utilities all over the state of North Carolina, all over the state of South Carolina. But we wanted to hone in on a few here that, are significant utilities that we work with a lot that are either undergoing some changes or have some changes on the horizon. And so the first one is Brunswick Electric. And, we have a lot of customers here that are on Brunswick Electric, in Brunswick County, of course, and they are transitioning to time of use for all customers beginning on November 1st. And their hours are actually shown here in this blue image, where you can see that the winter peak hours, which are from October 16th through April 15th, are 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., and their summer peak hours are April 16th through October 15th, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. And so what that means is that you're actually going to be paying a higher rate for the electricity demand during those windows. And John, this is where I'll pass it along to you for just a moment. Obviously this is a change that people have been made aware of, it's been communicated, but what are some of the conversations that you have been having with homeowners, either customers of ours already or homeowners that don't have solar or storage yet, about what impact they feel like this is going to have on how they use energy?
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. I think a lot of my conversations have been with BEMC customers looking into solar. They haven't installed just yet. And the impact is going to be significant. What time of use does, it sort of forces you to change your day-to-day consumption patterns, your day-to-day living, really. And for folks who aren't necessarily willing to do that, their bills are going to increase considerably. I think the number that Brunswick Electric has passed along to its customers is that, kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour, you're going to be looking at about a 7% rate increase. And if you don't change your consumption patterns to accommodate for those peak windows, you could see anywhere from 12 to 15% increase on your bill. Now, that's for folks who don't have solar. So there's a lot of pain there, and I think folks are going to turn to solar and potentially energy storage to mitigate that. People don't really move down here to relinquish more control on their day to day. They want to be able to sit back and relax. And a time of use rate with peak windows of 23 or 24 cents a kilowatt hour, that's going to be painful for folks who end up paying that. So a lot of folks are excited about pivoting to solar. I think for existing customers, it's an opportunity to look into energy storage. If you haven't had a conversation with us in the past, we're seeing a lot of folks look into it now, and it's just another resource to help mitigate that peak window. I think especially during the winter months, we do have a lot of systems, a lot of existing customers that produce a lot of energy between 2 and 6 p.m. during that summer peak window. Not so much the 6 to 9 a.m. during the winter, right? So I think it's sparked a lot of conversations around storage because being able to discharge during that peak window would obviously allow you to save and avoid that peak window. So those are really the two talking points that have sort of sparked up in the last couple months because of this rate change.
Cool. I appreciate you sharing that, JP. Yeah, I think that's super helpful, super insightful. I think pointing out, yeah, the 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. being, those are hours where systems are frequently producing and we'll get more into that in a moment. Some of the other utilities worth mentioning are Ori Electric down in South Carolina, who have a time of use demand rate. This is active. It's one that went active earlier this year, along with Santee Cooper EMC, who is also a TOU-D structure, also went active earlier this year. Caleb, I have it's Santee Cooper's rates that is just here on the chart as well. Do you mind speaking briefly to how that works, as well as what Ori Electrics looks like in a little bit different?
Yeah, absolutely, Gabe. Thank you. So yeah, Santee Cooper, their per kilowatt hour charge when a lot of folks are moving here or into the Myrtle Beach area and they see that they're always like, oh, that's not too bad. I can really run my power like I stole it. However, what a lot of folks don't realize is this demand charge, that $8 per kilowatt. It's been very interesting meeting with people who have lived in the area for maybe 5 to 10 years, and they've slowly seen their bills tick up. What one of the most interesting parts of it is I've got plenty of clients that are looking into solar because before this time of use period, they were maybe only paying $100 a month in a utility bill. When they came along with this demand charge from 3 to 6 p.m., all it takes for that bill to double in a month is for you to be running your air conditioner, maybe your pool pump's running, and you're cooking dinner and all the lights are on in your house. You could easily realize a 10 kilowatt demand charge, which would result in an $80 addition to your utility bill. So we've seen a lot of people who have reached out specifically for the reason that, hey, if you have company in town just one time in the month and there's one 15-minute period that you're not careful about it, they can ding you and almost double your utility bill. So to speak to the difference with Ori Electric, their rate structure is very similar. However, their peak charge is actually $12 per kilowatt. So 33% higher than Santee Cooper. And I think it's been very intriguing to see a lot of these utility companies kind of follow in suit. One by one, we're seeing more and more utilities switch into a time of use plan where you as the homeowner don't really have the option and don't have the control over your power.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Caleb. And we'll talk again a little bit more about a specific customer's case and savings on Ori Electric here towards the end of our time. And then lastly, just speaking to Duke Energy, Duke Energy customers, there have always been time of use rate options. I know we've met with several folks over the last several years who have been on time of use. There are lifestyles in which maybe it makes sense to do that. But for many of us, we're just on a standard rate structure with Duke Energy where whatever energy we use, it's billed at the same rate. Now that is changing for solar customers, for folks who have solar and are having systems installed, new solar systems installed and interconnected after January 1st, 2027, will be on a time of use structure. They call it a time of use critical peak pricing, where during a couple critical peak events during the year, there's an even higher rate charge. And so for those customers, that's just something to be thinking about as we get closer to that date, and also for folks who are looking 10 years from now, when I get kind of switched over after a grandfathering period, what does that look like for my bill, and being able to mitigate that. And while we don't have a timeline or expectation from Duke at this time of specifically switching other customers to time of use, I don't think it's at all out of the question as we see more and more utilities head in that direction. So jumping over to our next slide here, wanted to speak to some of the things that we can do to save on time of use. And so for starters, it's I think helpful and important to talk about what are those things that we can do that don't require significant purchases in solar or battery. Those are investments, right? And ones that I think are worth doing and hold their merit. But even at a basic level, what are some of the things that we can do? And so what we can do is consider shifting our load. So aligning our energy use with cheaper time windows. Simple behavioral changes can help mitigate your energy costs by not a measurable margin. And so what that might look like is running your washing machine, dryer, dishwashers during off-peak hours, right? So identifying and being aware of what are my peak hours and making sure that I'm not running appliances that are going to consume a significant amount of electricity during those hours. And then pre-cooling or preheating before peak hours. So, again, identifying when is that window? Do I want my HVAC kicking on at that time so that I get dinged with higher cost electricity or a demand charge, to Caleb's point, at that time? Charging electric vehicles, those are things that you can plug it in when you're outside of hours, right? You can even sometimes program that from the device. Now, to take it a step further, obviously there are smart devices out there. There's plenty of smart appliances. So utilizing those tools to mitigate your use during these peak events is, I think, helpful. The easiest and most common one that a lot of us already have are smart thermostats. Having those programmed to understand what your rates are and what you're paying in electricity, so you're not running it during the peak times. Turning the AC on right as everyone's getting home on a peak window. Also, utilizing smart appliance features. Many appliances have delay start features. You can say, I can do it with my coffee maker if I want to, right? I can prep it the night before and I can have it delayed to start at a specific time. So you can do that with all sorts of appliances to say, I'm going to have this start at this time, instead of starting it right when you're going to do that activity. So those are just some ideas for how to save, where you can, and doing little things to kind of shift your usage. But to take it a step further, obviously we want to mitigate the big picture, which is that electricity rates, regardless of what type of structure you're on, continue to go up. And so that's where solar comes into play. Now, there's a couple things that are important to touch on here. Obviously, we're solar contractors, so we talk about solar all the time. Many of you are customers of ours who already have solar. There's just a few things that I want to address that I think are important or maybe helpful to consider or think about in light of shifts towards time of use rate structures. And so those things are, one, that solar can, just as a very basic level, can reduce consumption from the utility. So that's number one. We can reduce how much we're using from the utility. Number two is that through careful design with our team, you can maximize savings on time of use. So there is a particular way that we could go about designing a system that could, in theory, save you more energy than if we were just designing a traditional solar design for a traditional rate schedule. And that may mean more savings. And to do that, what we would do is consider designing with east and west facing arrays to produce during those peak hours. And so, as we know, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And so if you're looking at, you've got a period of peak hours every day from 6 to 9 a.m. during the winter. While the sun's not going to be very high, one way to make sure that we're going to get some production is to consider, okay, do we have a high pitch or east southeast facing array that's going to allow us to produce some energy during that time? And then on the contrary, looking at the summer hours and the windows that are there, we've got 2 to 6 p.m., 5 to 8 p.m., those types of windows, then we're going to be looking for west, southwest facing roof surfaces to maximize our production during those times. And so I don't think that, this is something that we can maybe focus too much in on, but it's just an important design factor that as we get deeper into designing these systems for our customers, that are on time of use rates, it's worth considering. And not only is it worth considering, I think it's helpful when you think about, okay, is my home a viable home for solar if I'm on a time of use rate? In a lot of cases, if we look at a home and it's just east and west facing, there's certainly a financial case to be made for that home and that homeowner to go solar. But it wouldn't have been maybe the same case as if it were just all south facing, where you're getting a sort of complete day of sun. However, on time of use, now that kind of changes the conversation, because now the energy you're producing during those east or west facing windows has the potential to be worth more to you than if it was during, say, the off-peak window. So that's just something to think about, something that our team's certainly taking into mind when we're starting to design some more of these systems on time of use structures, and something we'll consider as we talk about, even panel additions and things like that as well. This was just a picture of a system we designed recently that I think was, a good representation of a home that otherwise, you look at it and you say, well, there's no south facing. How can we maximize performance here? But within the context of a possible time of use situation, this is a home that's going to maximize really, all portions of the day and the possible production that's available to it. So that's the picture that we can paint from a, solar only perspective. It's one way that we might be thinking about how we design systems to maximize savings if we're just installing a solar system on time of use. Now, to obviously gain a little bit more independence, more control, and to really optimize a home energy system to meet the specific needs and use patterns of a homeowner, that's where energy storage really comes into play. And we've talked about energy storage a lot on these webinars, and I've recognized several names on here as well who've joined today who already have batteries for their home. So a lot of this might be, not new news to you, but utilizing solar and storage just allows you to use the energy how and when you want to. So charging your batteries off of solar or from the grid during off-peak hours could allow you to then utilize that energy that's stored up during peak hours, even if you don't have solar production at that time. So let's think about the rainy days, the cloudy days, or as John alluded to, in the winter months, where maybe the sun's not high enough to really start generating electricity from your solar, you could have energy stored in your battery overnight so that you're ready to draw from it during that peak window instead of from the grid. And what's nice to know is that many of these batteries, and really all of them, are programmable and have options to maximize your savings based on your utilities rate structure. So when you have a system installed, you can go into the settings on your phone, you can input your rate plan, and the battery will automatically manage the energy it's stored and how it charges and discharges entirely based on what your utilities rate structure is and your needs as you're using it. So that means your hands off. We've talked about in the other scenario, okay, maybe you're having to change your patterns a little bit. There's a scenario here with battery storage where you don't have to change your patterns at all. The solar and battery system are just doing their job, making sure that you're saving everything that you can save on the rate plan that you're on. And it's helpful to understand as well and to distinguish that functionalities like Storm Watch or Storm Guard, which are features and other battery options, they allow your battery to just shift to prioritizing backup when needed. So they're going to help identify based on the National Weather Service and local weather alerts. Okay, there's a potential significant weather event coming. I need to prioritize backup capacity to make sure that if an outage were to occur, I'm charged up and ready to go, even if I otherwise was going to try to prioritize discharging to the home because we're in a peak event. You'd much rather make sure you've got that energy ready to go for a backup event than worry about one peak window on an off day. So that's a little bit of context there that I think can be helpful. All right. So before I pass it over to Caleb to look at a specific case study, I just want to encourage folks again, if you have any questions, we probably only have another 10, maybe 15 minutes here before we get to some Q&A. So feel free to submit them into the Q&A as well, and we'll answer as many as we can. Otherwise, I will pass it to Caleb to speak to the Millers.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gabe. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. It was very kind of the Millers to let us use them as an example. And one of the neat things about this project is they actually had received the news about this rate change coming up, and that's what kind of sparked their interest. They were thinking, hey, what can we do about this? So, but yeah, in a nutshell, whenever I met the Millers, they really had 2 or 3 main goals with this project. The first one, like most of you, I'm sure, is they were seeing higher and higher bills, and they were wondering what they can do about that to hedge against inflation and stop relying on the utility company for all their power. But more importantly, it was that change to the time of use structure that had interested them in looking at solar. So some brief numbers here. And this bill on the right-hand side is going to be their pre-solar bill, you could call it, so without any solar installed. Before they installed solar, their average bill was roughly $205, and with those peak hours in the winter time, being 6 to 9 a.m., they could see it spike up to anywhere around $270 in the winter. on the right-hand side here, I think the neat thing to point out is you'll see they only bought $59 worth of kilowatt hours from the utility company. But with that peak charge of $12 per kilowatt, it nearly doubled their utility bill simply because they used more power from 6 to 9 a.m. than they did any other time throughout the day. So I think just looking at that bill, you can see a couple of things that solar could provide a solution for. The first one being, hey, can we supply that energy that you are buying from the utility company right now, which we were able to do, and what I'll show you here in a moment. But then the peak charge, that's the other side of things, as Gabe was alluding to earlier on this webinar. We did a couple things, and Gabe, if you want to go to the next slide, might be helpful to show the example here. But the two things we were able to do is a careful design. So while we easily could have just covered the whole left side of this home up with solar, what we had kept in mind is, hey, if we can have some of the panels facing east to capture that morning sun for the winter peak hours, and the other panels facing west, that's going to help mediate that production throughout the day, and really help them all year round than just having a complete west-facing system. So we put an 8.6 kilowatt solar on their home, and in order to get rid of those peak charges, they had decided to install 2 Tesla Powerwall 3 batteries as well. So that's a total of 27 kilowatt hours, which is more than enough for their home to get through those peak hours without really having to change the way they live their day-to-day life. And in addition to that, it's really just providing them with energy independence, where they know their system's going to provide the majority of their power for their home. They know they have a battery system to help them get through the peak hours. And at the end of the day, that would give anyone peace of mind. So, and yeah, that yearly production estimate does cover about 90% of their annual needs for electricity. So you can see our install team did a great job out there. The panels look great up on the rooftop, and those power walls that are in this garage right there, seamless install. Everyone was happy with it, including the Millers and myself. So this is a neat slide. You'll get to look at a post-solar bill real quick. So what we were able to do for them with that installation, we got their average utility bill now down to $45, avoiding most time of use peak costs. So the highest peak charge that they've seen since they installed solar was $3. And we believe that was due to an issue on the utility company reading their meter incorrectly. But besides the point, in addition to that, we reduced their grid usage by 90%. And it was very fulfilling to go through this process with a homeowner that was very motivated to figure out, hey, what can we do differently in the future? Where the longer time that we're in this home, the more benefits we might see out of it. Or if they sell their home, that new homeowner can also have that same peace of mind. So the Millers were fantastic to meet with. They'd already met with a few companies and kind of knew what they were looking for. They were just trying to find the right folks to do it with, which we were fortunate enough to meet with them at the right time. So I really think the key takeaway here is by installing that solar and storage system, they really gained energy independence that's predictable, lower cost energy that they know won't go up in the future. And the big kicker is if the utility grid were to ever go down, they'll also have a means of backup power to run their house in a grid outage. So it's really a win-win scenario all around. And on the right-hand side here, you can see that change in their utility bill. So most utility companies have some form of crediting you on your utility bill in a month where you might send solar power back out to them. Where here you can see, while he did pay $27 to purchase that energy from Ori Electric, he also sent out enough electricity to get a $16 credit on his utility bill. So at the end of the day, he ended up paying about $9 or so for his power, in addition to the account charge, where really all he's paying Ori Electric now is for that monthly facility charge that you're required to pay, whether you have solar or not. But it's very neat. Me and Mr. Miller will touch base every now and then, and he's been thrilled with the system. And I think it's just really neat to see going from a pre-solar bill to a post-solar bill and how these systems can help you and your family.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Caleb. Yeah, super cool story. I think it's just one example of how these systems can maximize savings regardless of what your utility does, right? I think that's the point here is whether your utility has changed to time of use, is changing to time of use, or could be making a change to time of use or a different structure in the future, it's certainly solar and storage that gives you the most control over your savings and how you're billed for your electricity. And with that said, we'll go ahead and just close out here before jumping into our Q&A. For anyone who is interested in learning more about solar or storage, or even just wants to talk about their system and how they can better program it to meet their needs, then feel free. You can fill out, one, you can call us at our cell phone or our office phone here. You can reach out to your project developer. If you're interested in solar or storage, you can go ahead and contact us through our website using this QR code. If you'd like to go ahead and jump to speak to a project developer about scheduling a consultation to get an estimate for one of these systems, you can do so through this book a call link on this QR code. I'll leave those up for just a moment before jumping over to our Q&A slide. But with that, I will go ahead and open up the Q&A. And I do think this first question or two, John, might be best aimed towards you. We've got a couple of BEMC questions. The first one being, Joanne, I think, yeah, can we get an analysis for the benefits of battery storage based on our current Brunswick electric bills? John, do you want to speak to that? I can speak to it from a technical perspective, but.
Well, that is, I'm probably going to come back to you, Gabe. Where are we at with like the interval?
Yeah, so it's a great question.
Yeah, the answer, Joanne, is yes. There's a way for us to do that, but it's kind of in the works right now, to my understanding. Gabe.
Yep. So I'll jump in there. Appreciate that. So at a high level, yes, Joanne, we can certainly do that. And to be transparent, like the tools are out there for us to be able to plug in different battery products, look at your specific usage profile, and get an understanding of what your savings could look like and how much you could benefit from adding a battery. I would love to go through that exercise with you because these are new rate structures and we're working with the software provider that allows us to model those things to be able to do that. And so if you would feel comfortable reaching out to us and sharing the data that we would need to be able to do that, we would love to go through that process with you, if nothing else, just to see what we learn. Because I'm confident that it would be able to demonstrate savings. It's just a matter of how significant is that. I think that's an area that we could be excited about. And what they're going to look for, this is something maybe helpful to speak to for a moment, is the software is going to ask for like 15-minute interval data. And so depending on your utility, there are different ways to be able to go and get that data. Brunswick Electric, I know, has been really focused on making it easy for their customers to access it because we've already been talking to them saying, hey, this is going to be important for us to be able to get access to from our customers so that we can accurately model what their savings can look like. So yes, please follow up. You're welcome to email either John or myself. He's john.padden@capefearsolar. I'm Gabe.amy at capefearsolar. So either of those will work. Would love to follow up with you there. And your next question, are there differences in the benefits of battery storage between Duke Energy customers and Brunswick Electric customers? I mean, put simply, the benefit to Brunswick Electric customers in my eyes is more significant now, just because if everyone is going to be on time of use right now in November, Whereas for Duke customers, you're only going to time of use if you're going solar, in which case you're kind of balancing out that you're going to maximize your savings by including storage as it is. I think there's just more to be gained to sort of take that leap if you're on Brunswick Electric, at least in the short term here. I don't know if you see that any differently, John.
I would agree. I think there's Brunswick Electric customers have more value to gain by implementing solar and energy storage than Duke customers right now because every single BEMC customer now has to worry about those peak rates. So and I just want to reiterate that for everyone on the call. The time of use rate structure is not just for solar customers. It is for every single Brunswick Electric homeowner. So,
Yeah, that's important. And so another question here, Ron, this is a great one. Thanks for sharing this. The Tesla app for battery only goes by month, not by day. So, their peak windows starting and ending in the middle of months is something we'll have to figure out. So I'm not sure if there's an update that they have ready or will be able to push, or if they will just have, sometimes Tesla's pretty good typically about going ahead and building out the rate plan for you to just select. So that might be the faster pathway. Either way, I'll have a note here to go follow up with their team to address that question when we finish up. So thanks again for sharing that. Here you go, Caleb. Here's one for you from Charles. Can the Miller solar array bring both power walls to 100% on a typical day? There's kind of a lot behind that, but maybe you can speak to that briefly.
Yeah. So that was certainly something we looked at when designing the system, and part of the benefit of doing a partial east-west facing array on their home. But the short answer is yes. So they have their power walls programmed in the summertime to run from 3 to 6 p.m. and then in the winter time to run from 6 to 9 a.m. So that really prioritizes any energy that the solar's producing that they're not consuming in their home is going directly to those power walls to charge them up to 100%.
Yeah, great. And I think a short way to answer that too is like if you're offsetting 100% of your usage by design, then it's just a function of, when you're producing it. So if you're producing excess during the day, then yeah, it's going to charge the battery. Make sure you're ready to use it at night. So it will be cyclical. Next we have here. Good question. So this is a good one for us to follow up on. We have a system you installed that includes a Tesla battery. When it was installed, BMC did not have a time-based system, so we did not set up that feature in the software. Can we enter the peak rate parameters ourselves, or is that something we should speak to you about? Also, is energy we return to the grid during peak hours credited to us at the higher rate? So I guess I'll answer the first half of that, and then I'll pass it over to John here. So again, speaking a moment before about Ron's question, it does seem like there's a little bit of work to be done with Tesla to make it so that you can program it to, start and end periods during the middle of months, because that's the way BMCs works. Otherwise, you would be able to program it. You can certainly have that ability. It's as simple as changing from, what typically is self-consumption for Tesla users to time-based control. So that's all in the app for Tesla. You can change that. But we're happy to assist if it's helpful. So we'll follow up on that side. John, can you speak to how it works when you're pushing excess back to the grid during peak hours?
Yeah, Michael, if you're still there, I'm really glad you hopped on the webinar. Tell Judy and Augie I said hi. Yes, if you overgenerate during peak hours, you will be credited at the peak hour rate. So that would be, and you do save on all your kilowatt hours if if it's not covered by solar. You do pay taxes on your kilowatt hours. So that 21.5 cent rate, and Gabe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is pre-tax.
Correct.
So,
Okay.
so if you're over generating on peak, if you apply taxes to that 21.5 cents, you are pushing 23 cents, pretty close to 23 cents a kilowatt hour in savings.
So just to clarify on that, John, does that go for even production that's over and above what someone's consuming during the peak window over a billable period?
I don't think I fully understand what you're asking.
So I guess to clarify, like, if someone produces more electricity than they will consume during peak hours over the course of a month,
Hmm.
my understanding is that that excess would then be credited at a lower rate, only after they've covered all of their peak usage.
At the very end of the billing cycle,
Right.
yes,
Yeah,
it's
right. Okay.
credited at a partial rate. But if that energy is sent back to them within the billing cycle, it's
Right.
at the full 23-cent clip.
Right. So as long as they're basically covering for usage that they have during the billing period, then they're getting the full value of that.
Yes.
Yep, 100%. Okay, cool. Just want to make sure that was clear for anyone else. Um, Good question here. I'm trying to understand how BMC determines the charge for use in peak intervals. Any KW use at all over a certain amount. So I think to clarify, we're talking about kilowatt hours. I'm happy to address it. So Karen, that it's for all energy that you use during the peak window. So any kilowatt hours that you consume during their peak interval is going to be billed at the peak rate. So it has everything to do with what time it's happening at, not how much you use.
Yeah, and that those windows again are 2 to 6 p.m. From April through October for the peak summer window. So that's again 2 to 6 p.m. And then everything outside of that is at that off-peak rate. And then once you get to I believe it's mid-October through mid-April, so the winter billing, that peak window is going to shift to 6 to 9 a.m. And that'll also be the 21.5 cent rate. So every kilowatt hour outside of that peak window would be the off-peak rate at 7.9 cents.
So good question here. Duke Power customer with solar installed in 2018. Hey, Tom, with a battery, I understand we stay on net metering with no time of use through 2027. So continue to not utilize the battery except for power outages. In 2020, look at best way to operate. So Tom, actually, the way that it's going to work for you is your grandfather beyond that. So you're actually going to be grandfathered onto from your current legacy net metering structure onto a modified net metering structure beginning, I think it's in 2027, at which point you will be on that for about 10 plus years. So you've got a while until you'll shift to time of use unless they change something, um, which they could. But for now, you're good to go, remaining on the backup prioritization. Um, Otherwise, you certainly have the ability to switch over time of use if you'd like to sooner. But again, you're good to go on their legacy net metering for now, and then the modified net metering for several years as well. And I think, Charles, that hopefully answers your question also. If you are an existing Duke Energy customer with solar who is on the legacy net metering structure, you'll continue to be on that structure until I think 2027, at which point you will shift to the modified net metering structure, and you will then stay on that structure for 10, 12 years-ish. So you should be good to go and not be on time of use for a while. That was kind of the plan that they negotiated with the Utilities Commission, but that could change, I suppose. But for now, yeah, you don't have any short timeline to be switched over to TOU. Lastly, it looks like our last question here. Thanks again, everyone, for being so engaged. We really appreciate it. And I'll have a quick word before we finish up. But Joanne, can you push back to the utility from the power stored in your battery? So depending on your utility, yes, it's going to depend on your utility's rate plan. But in theory, you could. In fact, for folks who are on Duke Energy, they even have programs called virtual power plant programs that allow you to enroll and push back to the utility during their peak demand events. And it allows you to receive additional credits for it. For Brunswick Electric, not 100% sure, to be honest with you, if you're going to be able to push back from your battery. John, you got a clear answer on that?
To my knowledge, as of right now, no, you cannot discharge back to the grid. You can discharge during the peak rates, but no, there's not a way to discharge back to Brunswick Electric right now. That may change in the future, not just with BEMC, but with a lot of the other smaller co-ops. We do anticipate virtual power plant programs to have more of a widespread adoption. But it takes a while to get programs like that up and running. So Duke Energy is currently the only utility, to our knowledge, in North Carolina that offers that sort of program.
And in South Carolina for that matter.
Yeah.
Um, Well, cool, y'all. Again, thank you so much for everyone who's joined today. Thank you for your engagement. Thanks for the questions. Hopefully you found this webinar to be at least a little bit insightful or helpful. If you have any questions at all for Caleb, John, or myself, our emails are our last name at capefearsolarsystems.com. So john.padden, caleb.timothy, gabe.amy. Feel free to send us an email. We'd love to follow up. Otherwise, if you have ideas for a future webinar that you'd like for us to host, or you're interested in learning more about a solar battery solution for your home, you know where to find us. So thanks again. Have a great evening.